Hello, United in Recovery. It's Matt. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ and a grateful recovering alcoholic. I'm humbled to have the opportunity to bring you this week's installment in our series, Tough Love, learning to love when you don't feel like it. This week's message is about loving someone with a digital dark side. You know, for many of us, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated our migration into the digital world. If you need statistical proof of that fact, just consider that Reuters reported in April of 2020 that Zoom's daily participants had jumped from 10 million to over 200 million in just 3 months. And whether you actively participate in social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, you almost can't help but be aware of what's happening on them. But if you do actively participate, you're almost certain to have encountered someone with a digital dark side. You know what I'm talking about. That's the person that's constantly spewing hate, judgment, and lies, and it's like their social media platform is the digital street corner. And they're constantly standing on that corner, shouting at every passerby, whether they be friend or foe. You guys know there's 3 main sources of truth that I look to when I'm trying to discern how to handle challenging situations in my life. And those 3 sources are Scripture, the Big Book, and the 12 and 12. And as I started digging into those sources of truth on how to deal with someone with a digital dark side, I was led to the 12 and 12 on page 67, the chapter about step 6, where we become entirely ready to have God remove all our defects of character. And this is what it says there. Self-righteous anger can also be very enjoyable. In a perverse way, we can actually take satisfaction from the fact that many people annoy us, for it brings a comfortable feeling of superiority. Gossip barbed with our anger, a polite form of murder by character assassination, has its satisfactions for us too. Here we're not trying to help those we criticize, we're trying to proclaim our own righteousness. Now, my first reaction upon reading that passage from the 12 and 12 was, yeah, exactly. That's a perfect description of those people. No sooner had the thought formed in my mind, the conviction followed. Matt, this passage is written about you, your character defect, your self-righteous anger, your comfortable feeling of superiority, and your gossip barbed with anger. You are, Matt, those people. Which leads us to the first thing that we must understand about how we go about loving a person with a digital dark side. We must first understand that it's originating from a place of brokenness, of hurt, of pain, of mistaken identity. Just as when we were broken, we possessed all the character defects of self-righteousness, pride, anger, dishonesty, from which we are now granted a daily reprieve based upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition. But for the grace of God, our digital dark side is subject to be reactivated at any moment, should we decide to pick it back up. So the first thing we've got to do to love someone that has a digital dark side is to be able to empathize with them. Now note, I didn't say agree with them. I said empathize with their brokenness, their loneliness, their loss of identity, their longing to belong, to be loved. The second thing we have to do is to not engage them in the public square. A lot of the shouting that those with a digital dark side do from the digital street corner is about searching for a sense of belonging, establishing an identity. Most of the time, that's about shouting into a digital echo chamber in order to be told just how right they are, just how justified their anger, their darkness is. A complete and total validation of their identity. So dissenting with them in the group text or in their Facebook page or post or in any way in front of others is not going to be met with positively. Loving someone with a digital dark side has to be a one-on-one interaction, just you and them. When we engage them in the public forum in front of others, we risk committing that polite form of murder by character assassination. Remember those people we talked about in that passage in the 12 and 12? And finally, the third thing we have to do to love someone with a digital dark side is to remove the digital. Make it real. Get out of the digital medium entirely. You can tell them, look, I love you, and because I love you, I'm not going to engage with you digitally because it's too possible, too likely that my words can be misinterpreted, misunderstood, mistaken in that forum. The impact of the pandemic on communication and relationships will be studied for decades to come. But there's some old research that tells us everything we need to know about the shortcomings, the flaws, the total ineffectiveness of digital communications. Anybody heard of Dr. Albert Mehrabian? He wrote a book called Silent Messages back in 1971, which detailed a couple of research studies done with his partner that resulted in the 55-38-7 formula, also known as the 7% rule. You may have heard it said the other way around that 93% of personal communication is nonverbal, which is somewhat of a misnomer. The rule is actually this. There are 3 elements to personal communication. 7% is spoken words, or in the case of digital, written words. 38% is voice and tone. 55% is body language. So the way I read that is up to 93% of the message can be lost in digital communication because it loses voice, tone, and body language. And a phone call can be 38% more effective than digital because at least on an actual phone call, you don't lose voice and tone. And let me go ahead and address all you digital defenders out there. Emojis don't accurately convey voice and tone, at least not as effectively as actual voice and tone. But the best way to show love to someone with a digital dark side is to actually sit down with them. And yes, 6 feet apart will work. And add the 55% body language. That way you can be sure that your communication and your love for them comes across 100% effectively. Plus, it's a lot harder to be ugly to someone when you're face to face. It's a fact. This week's scripture comes from Ephesians 5, verses 8 and 9. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of the light, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. As people of recovery, followers of Christ, Easter people, we were all once in darkness. So let's remember that when we're struggling to find a way to love someone with a digital dark side. I can't wait to see you all on March 22nd, right here at United in Recovery, where we'll be able to communicate and fellowship with 100% effectiveness. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all soon.